The sun was a pale ghost behind sheets of ice crystals that never seemed to settle. It had been like this for 4 years now, perpetual twilight, temperatures that hadn't risen above freezing in months, and a silence so complete it felt like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something that would never come. I stood at the window of my broadcasting station, a converted apartment on the 14th floor of what used to be called the Riverside Tower, though there was no river anymore, just a frozen wasteland of white that stretched to the horizon. The mini ice age, they had called it in the beginning, when there were still scientists around to name things. A sudden, catastrophic shift in the Gulf Stream, they said. The Atlantic meridional overturning circulation had collapsed, and with it went any hope of moderate temperatures in the northern hemisphere. The cities of the north became tombs almost overnight. New York, Boston, Toronto, Chicago, millions died in the first winter when the cold came early and fierce, and the power grids failed under the strain. Those who survived fled south, only to find that the south was drowning. The climate didn't just shift, it convulsed. While we froze, the equatorial regions burned with unprecedented heat, and the melting ice that should have come to us instead flooded everything between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Outside my window, I could see the remnants of the old world preserved in ice like insects in amber. Cars frozen mid-drive, their occupants long since removed or buried under fresh snow. Street signs pointing to places that no longer existed as functioning communities. A playground where the swings hung motionless, coated in frost so thick they looked like crystal sculptures. The transformation had been swift and merciless. Our city, I still called it that. Though city implied life, movement, purpose, had once been home to 200,000 people. Now, I estimated maybe 2,000 remained, scattered in small groups, huddled around whatever heat sources they could maintain, burning furniture, books, memories, anything to keep the cold at bay for one more night. The government had evacuated months ago, or so we heard on the emergency broadcasts. Before those stopped too, they'd established a continuity zone somewhere in the southwest, where the temperature extremes were merely unbearable rather than instantly lethal. They'd promised to send help, supplies, evacuation transports. We were still waiting. What remained was chaos organized by desperation. The Northside Collective controlled the old shopping district, where they'd fortified against raiders and established a brutal hierarchy based on who could provide the most heat or food. The Riverside Scavengers, my neighbors, more or less picked through the frozen ruin for anything useful: fuel, copper wire, medicine from abandoned pharmacies. And then there were the wanderers, people who refused to settle, who kept moving because stopping meant freezing to death in your sleep. The infrastructure of civilization had become archaeological layers. Beneath the ice and snow, traffic lights still hung from their wires, though no electricity flowed through them. Storm drains choked with frozen debris that would never melt. Subway tunnels that had become icy tombs for those who'd sought shelter below ground, not realizing that cold air sinks and the tunnels would become killing chambers. I'd stopped counting the frozen bodies months ago. At first, we tried to honor the dead, marking where they fell, saying words over them. But there were too many, and the living needed all their energy just to stay alive. Now the dead simply became part of the landscape, warning markers of places too exposed, too dangerous, too cold. The world hadn't ended. It had transformed into something older, something primal. A world where fire was worth more than gold, where the ability to generate heat meant power, and where the simple act of surviving another night was its own small victory. My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a ghost speaking to other ghosts. Once, I was a radio journalist. I'd covered city council meetings, interviewed local business owners, reported on traffic accidents, and school board decisions, the mundane machinery of a functioning society. That life feels like it belonged to someone else, a character in a book I read long ago and barely remember. Now, I'm just a voice in the static, broadcasting from a makeshift station powered by a generator I keep running through sheer force of will and scavenged fuel. The equipment is a patchwork of salvaged parts. A ham radio rig I pulled from the local electronics store before the scavengers stripped it clean. A solar panel that's nearly useless in this perpetual gloom, and a backup generator that runs on whatever combustible material I can find. Some days it's gasoline siphoned from frozen cars. Other days it's cooking oil, wood alcohol, or fuel tablets I trade for with information. Information, that's my currency now. The only thing of value I have to offer. I broadcast on multiple frequencies, sharing what I know, where the North Side Collective is accepting new members, which buildings have collapsed under the weight of ice, where the scavengers found a cache of propane tanks, rumors of supply drops, or survivor caravans. I'm a hub, a nexus, a voice that connects the scattered islands of humanity still clinging to existence in this frozen hell. I broadcast every day at dawn and dusk, or what passes for them in the endless gray. 12 hours apart, regular as a heartbeat. People need that regularity, that proof that someone is still out there, still trying, still human enough to maintain a schedule in a world that has abandoned all schedules. What drives me? Sometimes I ask myself that in the long hours between broadcasts, when I'm huddled in my sleeping bag, burning precious fuel to keep my hands from freezing, listening to the wind howl outside like a living thing trying to get in. I keep broadcasting because I had a daughter once, Emma. She was 6 when the cold came. We tried to make it south with thousands of others, joining the Exodus caravans that formed in the early days. We made it as far as the city limits before the storm hit, not just a snowstorm, but something worse, a polar vortex that dropped temperatures 60 degrees in 6 hours. The highway became a parking lot of stalled vehicles and dying engines. I held Emma against me, wrapped in every piece of clothing we had, trying to share what little warmth my body could produce. She died quietly, falling asleep in my arms. I told her stories until the end, stories about summer, about warmth, about a world where ice cream was a treat on hot days instead of a forgotten luxury. She smiled at those stories. That was the last thing I remember her smile. I kept her with me for 2 days, unable to accept that she was gone. When I finally had to leave her, when survival instinct finally overpowered grief, I placed her gently in the back seat of our car, covered her with the blanket she'd loved, the one with the cartoon characters. I wrote her name on the window in frost with my finger, Emma Chen. We loved you. I walked back to the city alone. That was 3 years ago. I survive because she can't. I broadcast because every voice I help connect to another voice, every life I help save with information, is a small defiance against the cold that took her. I'm not looking for redemption. There is no redemption in a world this broken. I'm simply refusing to let the silence win. My personal losses make me good at what I do now. I understand the people I broadcast to because I am them. I know what it's like to lose everything, to wake up every morning surprised you're still alive, to measure your life in days instead of years, because planning for anything longer is an act of fantasy. The radio station has become my sanctuary and my prison. I rarely leave anymore. The 14th floor is high enough to avoid most raiders, who prefer easier targets at ground level. My door is reinforced with metal sheeting, and I've set up early warning systems, tripwires connected to bells, noise traps on the stairwell. It's not much, but it's enough to give me time to barricade myself if needed. My only companions are the voices that respond to my broadcasts. Sometimes it's just acknowledgement, a brief transmission saying, "Copy, Sarah, thanks for the info." Other times it's longer conversations during the dark hours, people who need to talk to another human being. even if it's just a voice through static. I've talked people through medical emergencies, helped coordinate rescue operations for trapped survivors, mediated disputes between groups before they turned violent. I've also listened to people die, more times than I can count. Their final words transmitted over the airwaves, asking me to tell someone they loved them, or simply asking me to stay on the line so they wouldn't be alone at the end. I always stay on the line. The cracks in my spirit never heal, but they're not meant to. They're proof that I'm still human, still capable of feeling loss and pain. The day I stop feeling those things is the day I become something else, something that merely survives without living. I refuse to let that happen, so I keep broadcasting. I keep the generator running. I keep marking time with my regular transmissions. I am Sarah Chen, and I am alive. And I will keep speaking into the void until either the void answers back or swallows me completely. The crisis we face isn't lack of water. We have plenty of that, frozen solid all around us. The crisis is heat. Every calorie of energy in this frozen world is precious beyond measure. Food has become secondary to fuel, because you can survive weeks without eating, but you'll die in hours without warmth. The mathematics of survival have become brutally simple. Acquire fuel, burn fuel, survive another day. Repeat until you can't. The temperature hasn't risen above 0 degrees Fahrenheit in 4 months. My thermometer, a simple alcohol-filled tube I keep by the window, shows -20 on a warm day. When the wind picks up, the chill factor drops it to -60 or worse. Exposed skin freezes in minutes at those temperatures. Your breath crystallizes before it leaves your mouth. Metal becomes so cold it burns like fire if you touch it with bare skin. The catastrophic effects ripple through everything. Trees have died en masse, their trunks splitting with gunshot cracks as the sap inside freezes and expands. The forests that ring the city have become graveyards of shattered wood, useless even for burning because the moisture inside turns to ice before combustion can take hold. You need to process the wood, thaw it, dry it, all of which requires heat you don't have. Animals have vanished. The birds fled south years ago and never returned. The dogs and cats that once roamed the streets are gone, whether frozen, starved, or eaten by desperate humans. Even the rats have died out, unable to find enough food to maintain their metabolism in the killing cold. The absence of animal life makes the silence even more profound. No birds chirping, no dogs barking, no insects buzzing, just wind and the occasional crack of ice. Human society has stratified based entirely on access to heat. The North Side Collective controls the old power plant where they've managed to keep one of the natural gas generators running intermittently. That makes them the most powerful group in the city. They trade heat for loyalty. You work for them, scavenge for them, fight for them, and in return you get 4 hours a day in their warming rooms. It's slavery dressed up as survival, but people line up for it because 4 hours of warmth can mean the difference between waking up the next morning or not. The Riverside Scavengers have a different approach. They've focused on portable heat, propane tanks, kerosene heaters, coal stoves, anything that can be moved and protected. They trade heat in smaller increments. Hourly rentals of heaters or bundles of processed fuel. It's more egalitarian than the collective system, but also more dangerous. Portable heat sources are targets for raiders, and the scavengers lose people every week to attacks. Then there are the solo survivors like me, finding our own ways to generate heat. I have my generator, solar panels, and a coal stove I built from salvaged metal. I burn anything combustible: books, furniture, clothing I've stripped from the frozen dead. I'm not proud of that last one, but pride is a luxury for people who aren't actively freezing to death. The limitations are crushing. My generator needs fuel, gasoline, diesel, alcohol, something to burn. I can scavenge maybe a gallon every few days if I'm lucky. That gives me 2 or 3 hours of electricity. enough to power my broadcasting equipment, and one small space heater. I have to choose, broadcast longer or stay warm longer. I can't do both. Food is running out. The supermarkets were stripped clean in the first year. Now we're down to breaking into homes, searching for forgotten pantries, dried goods, canned foods that haven't frozen and burst. But even when we find food, eating it presents problems. Frozen canned goods have to be thawed slowly or the cans explode. Dried foods need to be rehydrated, which means melting ice, which requires heat. Everything circles back to heat. Water is paradoxically both abundant and scarce. Ice and snow are everywhere, but melting it requires, say it with me, heat. And once melted, water freezes again quickly. I keep my water bottles inside my clothes, against my body, using my own warmth to keep them liquid. I drink body temperature water all day long, rationing it carefully, because melting more means burning fuel I need for other things. The science of it is straightforward, brutally so. The Gulf Stream collapse triggered a feedback loop. Less warm water reaching the North Atlantic meant more ice formation. More ice meant higher albedo, more sunlight reflected back into space instead of absorbed. Less absorbed heat meant colder temperatures, which meant more ice formation. Around and around the loop goes. A climate death spiral with no exit. Some of the old scientists, the ones still alive and broadcasting on shortwave frequencies, talk about tipping points and runaway effects. They debate whether this is a temporary shift or a new permanent state. They discuss intervention strategies, geoengineering schemes to restart the Gulf Stream, massive heating projects to break the ice feedback loop. I don't broadcast their debates. The people listening to me don't need theoretical solutions that might work in 10 years. If we had the resources and coordination of a functioning civilization. They need to know where to find fuel today, how to avoid frostbite, which buildings are safe to shelter in. They need to know how to survive until tomorrow. Every day, survival gets harder. The easy fuel sources are exhausted. The safe buildings have been picked clean. The weather seems to worsen with each passing week, as if the cold had developed a will of its own, is actively trying to exterminate us. I calculate my remaining fuel every morning. At current consumption, I have maybe 2 weeks left. After that, I'll have to make hard choices. Stop broadcasting to conserve heat, or keep broadcasting and risk freezing. Part of me wonders if it matters. Part of me thinks the cold has already won and we're just going through the motions of survival, acting out a play whose ending was written long ago. But then I remember Emma's smile, and I choose to keep fighting for one more day. The rumor started 3 days ago, crackling through the shortwave frequencies like wildfire through dry timber. Someone claimed they'd made contact with a group up north, far north, beyond what used to be the Canadian border, that had found geothermal vents. Natural heat, bubbling up from deep in the earth, melting the ice and creating pockets of warmth. They said there was liquid water, unfrozen ground, even some vegetation growing in the heat melt zones. They called it Eden. I first heard it from Marcus, one of the riverside scavengers who checks in with me regularly. His voice came through my speakers rough with static and something else, hope, maybe, or desperation dressed up as hope. Sarah, you hearing this Eden chatter? Multiple people saying the same thing. Coordinates up past the border. Someone saying they saw photos, green grass, Sarah. Actual green grass. I'd been skeptical. Rumors were currency in the frozen world, and most of them were worthless. Every few weeks someone claimed they'd found a warm zone, a government supply cat, a working hospital, a community that had electricity and food and safety. We'd chase these rumors like moths to flame, and they always turned out to be either exaggeration, traps set by raiders, or simply lies told by people who needed something to believe in. But this one felt different. The details were too consistent across too many sources. The coordinates matched 78.4 degree N, 102.3 degree W, somewhere in what used to be the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Multiple independent broadcasts mentioned the same landmarks, the same description of the terrain, the same plea for help. We're here. We're surviving, but we need more people, more skills, more hands to build something that lasts. I spent 2 days verifying what I could, reaching out through my network, cross-referencing the claims. Some of what I heard supported the rumors. A long-haul trucker who tried to make it north said he'd seen steam rising in the distance, like massive hot springs. A former geologist broadcasting from somewhere in Montana confirmed that geothermal activity in that region was theoretically possible. The Canadian Shield had volcanic roots, and seismic activity had been increasing, but other things didn't add up. The journey would be impossible for most people, 1,000 miles or more through hostile terrain across frozen wastelands, with no guarantee the destination was real. And even if Eden existed, what were the odds they'd welcome refugees? Every community we'd encountered had been insular, protective, unwilling to share their scarce resources with outsiders. Still, the rumor spread. I could hear it in the voices on the radio, the way people's transmissions changed, from flat recitations of daily survival to something more animated, more energized. Hope is contagious, even when it might be false hope. On the third day, I got a direct transmission from someone claiming to be actually in Eden. A woman's voice, younger than mine, clear and strong despite the stack. This is Rebecca Zhang broadcasting from the Northern Haven settlement, coordinates 78.4 north, 102.3 west. Eden is real. We have geothermal heat, liquid water, growing spaces. We're at 60 people now and can support up to 200. We need engineers, medical personnel, farmers, teachers. We're trying to rebuild here, not just survive. If you can make the journey, we'll accept you. But understand, it's dangerous. Many who try don't make it. Come prepared. Bring scales, bring supplies if you can. Bring hope. Zhang out. I recorded the transmission, analyzed it, listened to it a dozen times. The background sounds seemed authentic, voices, movement, the ambient noise of people working together. Either it was real, or someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to fake it. The question that kept me up that night, burning precious fuel to stay awake and think, was simple. Should I tell people? If Eden was real, broadcasting the information could save lives. People could make informed decisions about whether to attempt the journey. They could prepare, plan, organize caravans. Hope could become more than just a word. If Eden was fake, a trap, delusion, or simply an exaggeration of something much smaller, then I'd be sending people to their deaths. They'd burn their remaining resources on a journey to nowhere, and die freezing in the wilderness chasing a lie. I am not a leader. I'm just a voice on the radio. But people listen to me. They trust me because I've been reliable, because I verify before I broadcast, because I don't deal in false hope. If I endorsed this Eden rumor, people would act on it. The weight of that responsibility is crushing. I think about Emma constantly now. What would I want someone to tell me if I'd had the chance to save her? Would I want the comfortable lie that kept us in place? Or the dangerous truth that offered a slim chance at survival? I know the answer. I've always known it. The air in my station has grown thicker somehow, more oppressive. Dust hangs in the beams of my lead lantern. Visible reminders that this frozen world is also a dying world, slowly choking on its own stagnation. My legs ache with cold, despite the layers of clothing. I can feel the ice forming at the edges of my windows, creeping inward millimeter by millimeter. Nature's slow reclamation of spaces we once thought we controlled. Outside, I can see lights in other buildings, small fires, lanterns, the glow of other survivors going through their nightly rituals of survival. How many of them are listening to their own radios right now, Here, the same Eden rumors wrestling with the same impossible choices. I key my microphone, then stop. Once I broadcast this, I can't take it back. Once I give people hope, even uncertain hope, I become responsible for whatever they do with it. But isn't that what I've been doing all along? Every piece of information I share, every location I report, every warning I broadcast, they all influence people's action. Information is power, and power carries responsibility. I think about Marcus and the other scavengers. I think about the families huddled in the north side, collectives warming rooms. I think about the solo survivors scattered across this frozen city, each one fighting their private war against the cold. They deserve to know. They deserve the choice. I key the microphone again, and this time I speak. This is Sarah Chen, broadcasting on all frequencies. I have information about the Eden rumors. Stand by for coordinates and details. What you do with this information is your choice. All I can tell you is what I've verified and what remains uncertain. Sarah out. And just like that, I've changed everything. The decision came faster than I expected. Within 12 hours of my Eden broadcast, groups were forming, organizing, preparing to head north. Marcus and 15 other scavengers. A splinter faction from the North Side Collective, 20 strong. Solo survivors and small family groups. Another 30 or 40 people scattered across the city. By my count, nearly 80 people were planning to attempt the journey. Marcus came to see me in person, which was itself extraordinary. People didn't make social calls in the frozen world. Every journey was a risk. Every exposure to the outside a chance to die. But he climbed 14 floors, knocked on my reinforced door with the code knock we'd established, and I let him in. He was younger than his voice suggested, maybe 30, with a frost-scarred face and eyes that had seen too much. He moved carefully, conserving energy the way all survivors did, and gratefully accepted the cup of warm tea I offered. Melted snow, heated on my coal stove, flavored with ancient tea bags I'd been hoarding. "We're going," he said without preamble. "Leaving in 3 days. Wanted to ask if you'd come with us." The invitation surprised me. I broadcast. "That's my role. My value. You'd have value in Eden too. Someone who can coordinate, communicate, organize. Someone people trust." He sipped the tea, savoring it. "Besides, Sarah, when's the last time you left this building?" I didn't answer because we both knew. 6 months. Maybe longer. "You'll freeze here eventually," Marcus continued. "We both know it. Fuel's running out. Supplies are dwindling and winter's just getting started. This could be the coldest year yet. You can die here alone, or take a chance on living there with others." He wasn't wrong. My calculations gave me 2 weeks of fuel. Maybe 3 if I rationed severely. After that, I'd have to choose between broadcasting and heating, and eventually I'd run out of both. The math was brutal and simple. "What's your route?" I asked. Marcus pulled out a hand-drawn map, crude but detailed. "North through the city. Pick up Highway 35. Follow it until we hit the old border. From there, we navigate by landmarks and GPS, if we can get working." Rebecca said they'd send out guide beacons. Once we're in range, heat signatures we can track. That's 1,000 miles through frozen hell. 943 actually. Figure we can make 15 miles a day if the weather holds. 2 months, maybe 10 weeks. If the weather holds, I repeated. "Marcus, you know the storms have been getting worse. The polar vortex is unstable. You could hit a whiteout that lasts for days, temperatures that drop to -80. Could happen here too." He met my eyes. "At least on the road, we're moving towards something. Here, we're just waiting to die." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. He was right. That night, I made my decision. I would go, not because I believed Eden was real. I'd assigned it maybe 50-50 odds, but because staying meant certain death, and moving meant uncertain death. And there's a universe of difference between those two things. I began preparing, sorting my equipment into what I could carry, almost nothing, and what I'd have to leave behind, almost everything. The broadcasting equipment was too heavy, too fragile, too power-hungry. I could take my handheld radio, my portable solar panel, a few tools. Everything else would stay. The hardest part was deciding what personal items to bring. I had a photo of Emma, water-damaged and faded. I had her blanket, the one I'd covered her with in the car. I had a journal I'd been keeping, irregular and incomplete. These things were weightless in terms of survival value, but they weighed everything in terms of what they meant. I packed them all. If I was going to die on the frozen plains, I'd die with memories of who I'd been 2 days before departure. The first storm warning came through on the weather frequencies. A massive low-pressure system forming over what used to be Hudson Bay, moving south. The forecaster, an amateur meteorologist broadcasting from somewhere in Minnesota, sounded worried. "This is big. People. Pressure readings are the lowest I've ever seen. Wind speeds predicted at 70 to 90 miles per hour. Temperature drop of 40 degrees possible. If you're planning any travel, delay it. This is going to be a killer storm." Marcus called an emergency meeting. Do we delay? Do we risk it? Do we cancel entirely? The debate was fierce. Some wanted to wait the storm out. Others argued that waiting meant consuming supplies we'd need for the journey. The collective splinter group's leader, a hard woman named Teresa, pointed out that storms like this were becoming more frequent, not less. We could wait for clear weather and wait forever, she said. Every day we delay, someone in this room runs out of fuel and dies. We move now or we don't move at all. In the end, we voted 53 to 27 in favor of going. I voted yes. We left at dawn on the third day. 81 people in a ragged column, pulling sleds loaded with supplies, wearing every piece of clothing we owned. The sky was the color of old iron, and the wind had already picked up, gusting to 30 miles per hour, strong enough to make walking difficult. Marcus led the vanguard, breaking trail. I was in the middle of the column, not strong enough for the front, not weak enough for the rear. We moved slowly, painfully slowly, covering maybe 2 miles in the first 3 hours. By noon, the storm hit. I've been through blizzards before, but this was something else entirely. The wind didn't just blow, it attacked, physically shoving us, knocking people off their feet, ripping sleds from our hands. The snow came horizontally, tiny needles of ice that found every gap in our clothing, every exposed bit of skin. Visibility dropped to 0 within minutes. We couldn't go forward, we couldn't go back. All we could do was huddle together, linking arms, trying to share body heat, while the storm screamed around us like a living thing that wanted us dead. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning in the whiteout. Someone near me was praying in Spanish. Someone else was crying. I heard Marcus shouting orders, trying to keep people together, but the wind tore his words away. The cold was indescribable. It bypassed cold, went straight to pain, pure nerve fire agony that made thinking impossible. My fingers went numb first, then my toes, then my face. I couldn't feel my nose anymore. I thought about frostbite, about losing appendages, about dying here in the storm, only 3 miles from where we started. I thought about Emma, and how at least I'd see her soon. Then through the howling wind I heard something, a sound that didn't belong. A mechanical sound, an engine. Through the white curtain of snow, shapes appeared, vehicles, massive, tracked vehicles, like military transports adapted for Arctic conditions. They had their lights on, powerful floods that cut through the storm like searchlights. A door opened on the nearest vehicle. A figure in a thermal suit jumped down, stumbled toward us, grabbed the nearest person, Marcus, I think, and shouted something I couldn't hear. Then they were pulling us toward the vehicles, lifting us inside, and the storm was suddenly outside instead of inside. and warmth blessed impossible. Warmth began to seep into my frozen limbs. I don't remember much of what happened next. I think I passed out. When I woke, I was in the back of a transport, wrapped in thermal blanket, with an 4 in my arm pumping warm fluids into my veins. A medic leaned over me. Young, competent, with kind eyes. "You're safe," she said. "Welcome to Eden." And despite everything, despite the pain, the exhaustion, the disbelief, I started crying. We'd made it 3 miles from the city before nearly dying. Eden had come to us. The transport's interior was the warmest place I'd experienced in 4 years. Not just warm-hot. Temperature controlled to a luxurious 65 degrees, with heated seats and thermal blankets and warm air blowing from vents in the ceiling. It felt like being wrapped in a memory of summer. Around me, the other survivors were experiencing the same revelation. Some were crying. Others sat in stunned silence. A few were laughing with the kind of hysteria that comes from surviving the impossible. The medic, her name was Dr. Patel, she told me, later moved among us efficiently, checking for frostbite, treating hypothermia, administering warm fluids. 3 people had serious frostbite on their extremities. 2 were unconscious. But miraculously, we'd lost no one. "How did you find us?" I managed to ask through chattering teeth. "We've been monitoring broadcasts," Dr. Patel said, adjusting my 4. "When you announced the Eden coordinates, we knew people would try to come. We sent out rescue teams to intercept travelers before they got too far. You're the 3rd group we've picked up this week, so Eden is real." She smiled. "See for yourself." Through the transport's windows, I watched the frozen landscape roll past. We were moving fast, much faster than we could have walked. The storm had lessened somewhat, though visibility was still poor, but occasionally, gaps in the snow revealed the devastation outside, the endless white, the frozen world that wanted us dead. We drove for 6 hours, which seemed impossible. How much fuel did these vehicles carry? How did Eden have the resources for multiple rescue operations? Questions piled up in my mind, but exhaustion kept pulling me under, and I'd wake from brief naps disoriented, unsure if this was really happening or if I'd frozen to death in the storm. And this was my brain's last hallucination. But it was real. The warmth was real. The smooth ride was real. The low hum of conversation as survivors began to talk to each other, sharing their disbelief and wonder, was real. Then, as we crested a ridge, the storm broke, the snow curtains parted, and I saw it. Steam, massive columns of steam rising from the earth, white plumes climbing into the gray sky, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered across the landscape like geothermal geysers. And around them, in a radius that extended for miles, the ground was dark. Not white, not frozen, dark earth, exposed ground. Geothermal vents, Dr. Patel said, watching my reaction. They started opening up about 2 years ago. Seismic activity released pressure from deep in the earth. Now there are hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all generating heat. Enough heat to melt the ice. Enough heat to create a zone where life is possible. As we descended toward the settlement, I could see more details. The vents were surrounded by collection systems, pipes and tanks that captured the steam and heat, redirected it, controlled it. Between the vents were structures, dozens of them, built from salvaged materials and what looked like prefab components. Greenhouses, their transparent walls fogged with moisture. Living quarters, storage buildings, solar panel arrays, and people. So many people moving purposefully through the settlement, working, building, living. Eden wasn't a camp or a temporary shelter. It was a community. A real, functioning community with infrastructure and organization and hope. We pulled into a receiving area where more medics waited. They helped us out of the transport, supporting those who couldn't walk, guiding everyone toward a processing center. Everything was efficient, practiced, like they'd done this many times before. How many people are here? I asked Dr. Patel as she walked me toward the medical building. 243 as of this morning, 224 after you arrived. Where did everyone come from? Everywhere. We've picked up refugees from a dozen different cities. Some walked here on their own before we set up the rescue operation. Others were brought by teams like the one that found you. Rebecca, you heard her broadcast. She's been the main voice calling people in, but there are others. We're trying to gather as many survivors as we can. The medical building was warm and bright, lit by LED panels powered by a glance. Outside, a geothermal generator humming quietly next to one of the heat vents. Dr. Patel led me to an examination room where she conducted a thorough check, treating my minor frostbite, rehydrating me, checking my vitals. You're malnourished, she said matter-of-factly, and you're in the early stages of hypothermia, but nothing life-threatening. Rest, warm food, and time will fix most of it. The frostbite on your left hand is concerning. You might lose the pinky finger. We'll monitor it. The casual mention of potentially losing a finger should have bothered me more than it did, but I was too overwhelmed by everything else. Losing a finger seemed like a small price for surviving. Over the next hours, I slowly recovered. They gave me hot soup, actual hot soup, made from hydroponic vegetables, and what tasted like real chicken, though Dr. Patel admitted it was reconstituted protein powder flavored to taste like chicken. I didn't care. It was warm and filling, and I savored every spoonful like it was the finest meal I'd ever eaten. As I ate, I watched through the window as my fellow travelers were processed, examined, and sorted. Most were in better shape than expected. The brief exposure to the storm had been terrifying, but not ultimately lethal, thanks to Eden's rapid response. Marcus passed by my window and gave me a thumbs up, grinning wider than I'd ever seen. Later that evening, after I'd been cleared medically and assigned temporary housing, I met Rebecca Zhang. She was younger than I expected from her voice, mid-30s, with short black hair and burn scars on her left cheek that spoke of some past fire. She had the bearing of someone used to command, but her smile was genuine when she shook my hand. Sarah Chen, I've been listening to your broadcasts for months. You've saved more lives than you know. You're the one who called us here, I said. We called everyone. You're the one who made people believe it was possible. She gestured for me to follow her. Come on, let me show you what we've built. We walked through the settlement as dusk approached, or what passed for dusk in the perpetual gloom. But here, with the geothermal steam rising all around, there was a softness to the air, a humidity that felt almost tropical compared to the knife-edge dryness of the frozen world beyond. Rebecca explained as we walked. The geothermal activity had started unexpectedly. Seismic shifts triggered by the weight redistribution as polar ice caps simultaneously melted in some regions and expanded in others. The vents had opened up across a roughly 100 square mile area, creating a zone where temperatures remained above freezing year-round. We're not warm, she clarified. Average temperature is maybe 35-40 degrees, but that's survivable. That's workable. And with the geothermal heat, we can create warm spaces, grow food, melt water, generate electricity. She showed me the greenhouse's first massive structures built from salvage, glass and plastic, heated by pipes carrying geothermal water. Inside, I saw something I'd forgotten existed: green plants, rows and rows of them. Lettuce, kale, tomatoes, beans, potatoes. Not thriving exactly, the light was too dim for that, but growing. Actually growing. We use grow lights when we can spare the electricity, Rebecca said, noting my amazement. But mostly we rely on cold hardy crops and extend the growing time. We're producing about 60% of our food needs now. The rest comes from scavenging operations and the occasional supply run to abandoned settlements. Next were the living quarters, prefab structures that had been military barracks, arranged in organized clusters around the geothermal vents. Each unit housed 4 to 6 people with communal kitchens and bathrooms. Simple, efficient, warm. Everyone works, Rebecca explained. We don't have room for freeloaders. You work according to your skills and ability. Engineers maintain the geothermal systems. Farmers work the greenhouses. Scavengers run supply operations. Medical personnel staff the clinic. And we need communicators, people who can maintain contact with other survivor groups. Coordinate rescue operations, help us find more people with needed skills. That's where I'd fit. If you want to. Your broadcasting experience is valuable. We need someone to manage our communications network, maintain contact with the outside world, help coordinate rescue operations. She paused. But Sarah, I want to be clear about something. This isn't paradise. We have problems, serious ones. We sat on a bench near one of the larger vents, feeling its warmth radiate outward. Rebecca's expression grew more serious. We're at capacity, almost. We can support maybe 300 people with our current infrastructure. After that, we'd need to expand, build more greenhouses, develop more heating systems, create more living space. That requires resources we're struggling to obtain. Second problem, not everyone who comes here is grateful or cooperative. We've had fights, thefts, one attempted murder. When you bring together desperate people from different survivor groups, each with their own hierarchies and loyalties, conflict is inevitable. We've had to establish rules, consequences, a security force. We're one bad winter or one major conflict away from this place tearing itself apart. Third problem, the vents aren't stable. We've had 3 of them seal up suddenly in the past 6 months. If enough of them close, we lose our heat advantage. We could be back to freezing conditions before we know it. We're living on borrowed time and borrowed heat, and we know it. She looked at me directly. I'm telling you this because you have a choice. You could stay here and help us build something real, something lasting, or you could take some supplies and head further south, try to find one of the continuity zones the government supposedly established. I won't lie to you about our situation, but I also won't lie and say it's not better than what you left behind. I thought about my broadcasting station, cold and empty now. I thought about the frozen city, the scattered survivors barely clinging to life. I thought about Marcus and the others from our group, already being integrated into Eden's community, finding roles and purpose. I thought about Emma and how she'd want me to choose life over mere survival. I'll stay, I said. At least for now. You need a communications coordinator, and I need a reason to keep going. Seems like a fair trade. Rebecca smiled. Welcome to Eden, Sarah Chen. Try not to freeze to death. It was the first joke I'd heard in years that actually made me laugh. The first week in Eden was disorienting. My body, so used to constant cold, struggled to adjust to the relative warmth. I'd wake sweating under blankets I'd piled on from habit, then feel guilty for the waste of resources when I had to wash them. My appetite returned with a vengeance. Years of semi-starvation suddenly reversed, and I had to force myself to eat slowly, to not make myself sick, gorging on the first real meals I'd had in forever. But the hardest adjustment was psychological. For years, my entire existence had been focused on immediate survival. Staying warm, finding fuel, avoiding raiders, broadcasting just enough to help others without putting myself at risk. Every decision was made through the lens of, will this keep me alive until tomorrow? Here in Eden, people were planning for next year, next decade. They talked about crop rotation schedules, about building permanent structure, about establishing trade routes with other potential survivor settlements. They talked about the future like it was something that might actually exist. My role as communications coordinator turned out to be more complex than I'd imagined. Eden had a sophisticated setup, a radio tower built from salvaged materials, powered by geothermal generators. capable of broadcasting on multiple frequencies. They had shortwave, ham radio, even some old emergency broadcast equipment they'd rescued from an abandoned civil defense facility. My job was to manage it all, maintain regular broadcasts calling other survivors, coordinate with rescue teams heading out to pick up refugees, keep logs of all incoming transmissions, and most importantly, gather intelligence about conditions in the outside world. That last part was grimmer than I'd expected. From my station in Eden's communications hub, a warm room in what had been a highway maintenance building, now insulated and retrofitted, I listened to the world dying. Broadcasts came in from all over the frozen north. Solo survivors, their voices growing weaker day by day. Small communities running out of resources. Desperate pleas for help from groups trapped by storms or surrounded by raiders. And then, often, nothing. Silence where a voice had been. I documented it all, plotted survival locations on maps, prioritized rescue operations based on who had the best chance of making it and who had skills Eden needed. It was brutal calculus, triage on a civilizational scale, and it weighed on me. But there were successes too. We rescued a group of engineers from a frozen research station who brought valuable technical knowledge. A family of farmers who'd been growing food in an improvised greenhouse before their fuel ran out. A doctor, 2 teachers, a mechanic, a carpenter. Each addition to Eden's community was a small victory, another set of hands and skills, helping us build something sustainable. Marcus settled in quickly, joining the scavenging crews that made regular runs to abandoned settlements within a 100-mile radius. They'd return with vehicles loaded with salvaged materials, copper wire, tools, medical supplies, clothing, anything that could be repurposed. He seemed happier than I'd ever known him, probably because he was moving, doing, building, instead of just surviving day to day. I settled into a routine, morning broadcasts at dawn, calling out to survivors, providing coordinates, offering hope. Midday was for processing incoming transmissions, updating maps, coordinating with Rebecca on rescue priorities. Afternoons were for maintenance, keeping the broadcasting equipment running, testing backup system, training others in radio operations, so Eden wouldn't be dependent on any single person. Evenings were communal meals in the dining hall, where everyone gathered to eat and share news. It was strange at first, being around so many people after years of isolation. The noise, the conversation, the simple fact of human presence, it was overwhelming. But gradually I adjusted. I even began to enjoy it. I made friends. Real friends, not just voices on the radio. Dr. Patel and I bonded over evening tea and discussions about medical ethics in a post-collapse world. A woman named Keiko, who managed the greenhouses, taught me about hydroponics and showed me how to tend the plants. Even Rebecca and I developed an easy working relationship, coordinating on communications strategy and rescue operations. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something larger than my own survival. But Rebecca's warnings proved prophetic. Eden had problems. The first major crisis came 6 weeks after I arrived. One of the primary geothermal vents, the one that heated the main greenhouse complex, suddenly decreased in output. The temperature inside the greenhouses dropped 10 degrees in an hour. If we couldn't fix it, we'd lose most of our crops. The engineering team worked frantically, trying to determine the cause. A partial blockage in the vent system, a shift in the geothermal pressure. Without proper equipment and training, we were essentially guessing. They tried clearing the pipes, adjusting flow rates, rerouting heat from other vents. Nothing worked. Keiko watched the temperature gauges drop with visible despair. 2 more degrees and the tomatoes die. 5 degrees and we lose everything except the root vegetables. We can't afford this loss. In the end, it was one of the rescued engineers who solved it, not by fixing the vent, but by jury, rigging a supplemental heating system using salvaged electric heaters powered by our generators. It wasn't efficient, and it burned through fuel we could barely spare, but it kept the greenhouses warm enough to save most of the crops. But the incident exposed our vulnerability. We were dependent on natural forces we couldn't control, living on the edge of collapse, one failure away from catastrophe. The second crisis was human. A group of 23 refugees arrived from a settlement that had collapsed. They'd made the journey on their own, following our broadcast coordinates, arriving half-frozen and desperate. We took them in, as we always did, but this group was different. They'd been part of a militant survivor faction, ruled by force and strict hierarchy. Their leader, a man named Carlson, expected to maintain his authority in Eden. When he realized we operated on a more democratic, collective model, he began agitating, gathering followers, arguing that Rebecca's leadership was weak, that we needed strong leadership to survive. It came to a head 3 weeks after their arrival. Carlson and his loyalists attempted a coup during a community meeting, trying to physically remove Rebecca from leadership. The confrontation turned violent, the first real violence Eden had seen. Marcus was there. So was I. I remember the shock of seeing people I'd helped rescue now fighting each other, the careful peace we'd built shattering in moments. The security team intervened, breaking up the fight, but not before several people were injured. The aftermath was painful. Eden's council, a group of elected representatives from different parts of the community, had to make a decision. Carlson and his most loyal followers, 7 people in total, were exiled, given supplies for a week's journey and sent away. I watched them leave, walking back into the frozen wasteland we'd saved them from, and felt the moral ambiguity of it like a weight. We'd saved them only to condemn them. But what choice did we have? They'd tried to destroy the fragile community we were building. This is the world now, Rebecca said quietly as we watched them disappear into the snow. Sometimes there are no good choices, only survival choices. Despite these crises, Eden grew. By the end of my 3rd month there, we'd reached 260 people. The greenhouses expanded. New living quarters went up. The scavenging teams pushed further out, bringing back more resources. We even established contact with another small survivor settlement, 200 miles south, beginning to talk about trade, mutual support, maybe even eventual merger. Slowly, impossibly, we were building something, but the world beyond Eden continued its decline. Through my broadcasts, I tracked the collapse of the last major survivor groups. Chicago's Riverside community, which had held out for years, finally fell to a combination of disease and cold. The North Side Collective, back in my old city, fractured and scattered. One by one, the voices I'd known for years went silent. The frozen world was winning. Humanity was losing. Eden was an island of warmth in an ocean of ice, and the ice was patient. In the long, dark hours of my communication shifts, listening to the static and the occasional desperate transmission, I'd think about Emma, about the world she'd never see, about whether what we were doing here mattered in the grand scope of geological time and climate catastrophe. Then I'd look around at the people working together, building together, surviving together, and I'd think, maybe it doesn't matter to the universe, but it matters to us. It has to be enough. I'd key my microphone and broadcast again, sending hope into the static, calling other survivors home. Spring came to Eden, though you wouldn't know it by conventional measures. The sky remained gray. The world beyond our geothermal bubble stayed frozen, and the temperature outside our warm zone never rose above freezing. But we marked it anyway. March 21st, the vernal equinox, the day that had once meant renewal and warmth. Rebecca organized a celebration. Nothing elaborate, we didn't have resources to spare, but we gathered in the main hall, shared extra rations, and people took turns sharing memories of springs past. Green grass, cherry blossoms, rain that wasn't frozen, children playing outside without protective gear. It was Marcus who suggested we plant something symbolic. Not in the greenhouses, he said. Outside, in the ground, something that represents hope for better times. The idea took hold. Keiko found seeds for a hardy birch tree, something that might survive cold conditions if they improved. We chose a spot near the center of the settlement, dug through the frozen topsoil until we hit the warmer earth heated by geothermal vents below and planted it. It was absurd, really. The tree would almost certainly die, but we planted it anyway, and people stood around in the cold, watching, as if witnessing something sacred. "This is who we are now," Rebecca said during the informal ceremony. "We're the people who plant trees we may never see grow. We're the people who believe in futures we can't guarantee. That's not foolishness. That's the most profound act of hope humans are capable of." I thought about Emma as we covered the seedling with soil, about how I'd never get to show her this place, never get to teach her about the community we'd built. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't that she got to see it, but that we built it anyway for all the children who'd been lost, for the possibility that someday, somehow, there might be children again who'd live in a world less broken. The months that followed were hard but productive. We hit 290 people, straining our resource limits. The council made the difficult decision to temporarily stop rescue operations, focusing instead on expanding our infrastructure to support more people. My communications work shifted. Instead of just calling survivors in, I began coordinating with a small network of other survivor settlements we'd discovered. There was Eden, the largest. A settlement in what had been Montana, maybe 100 people clustered around Hot Spring, a group in the ruins of Winnipeg who'd learned to harvest algae from heated underground pools, a few others scattered across the frozen north, each finding their own way to survive. We began sharing information, trading expertise if not physical goods. The Montana group taught us about water purification techniques. We shared our greenhouse growing methods. Slowly, haltingly, a network formed. Not a new civilization. We weren't anywhere near that, but at least communication, connection, the beginning of cooperation. The geothermal vents remained unpredictable. We'd lost 3 more in the past months, though we'd also gained 1 new vent that opened up unexpectedly. Net neutral. But the uncertainty was constant. Engineers worked on systems to detect changes in geothermal activity, hoping to predict vent failures before they happened. And the weather continued to worsen. The mini ice age showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to deepen. Winter temperatures dropped to levels that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. Summer, if you could call it, that barely brought temperatures above zero. I asked Rebecca once, during a quiet evening in the communications hub, whether she thought we'd ever see the world recover. She was silent for a long moment, staring at the maps on the wall showing the locations of survivor settlements, each one a tiny pinprick of human persistence in a vast frozen wilderness. Honestly, I don't know. The climate scientists we've talked to, the few still alive, say the Gulf Stream collapse might take centuries to reverse naturally, or it might never reverse. We might have permanently shifted into a new climate regime. So, this is forever? Maybe. Or maybe human civilization rises again in the southern hemisphere, where conditions are more stable. Maybe they develop the technology to restart the Gulf Stream, to reverse the damage. Maybe in 100 years or 1,000 years, people return to these lands and find the ruins of Eden and wonder what we were trying to do. She turned to look at me. But Sarah, I've stopped thinking about forever. Forever is too big, too overwhelming. I think about today, about this year, about keeping the people in this settlement alive, and building something that might last a little longer. Small victories, incremental progress. That's all we can do. Is it enough? It has to be, because it's all we have. I understood what she meant. The scope of the catastrophe was too large for any individual to comprehend fully. The collapse of the climate, the death of billions, the transformation of the planet into something hostile and strange, it was trauma on a species level. You couldn't process it, couldn't grieve it properly, couldn't fix it. All you could do was survive one more day, help one more person, plant one more seed, and hope that collectively these small acts added up to something meaningful. My own trauma was more personal, more immediate. Emma haunted my thoughts less frequently now, but when she appeared in dreams, in unguarded moments, the grief was as sharp as ever. I'd learned to live with it, the way you learn to live with a wound that never fully heals. It became part of me, a constant ache that informed everything I did without overwhelming me. I wasn't looking for redemption anymore. I'd accepted that there was no redemption for losing your child, no cosmic balance that would make it okay, but I could honor her memory through action, through helping others survive, through being part of something larger than my own pain. That had to be enough. 1 year after arriving at Eden, I stood outside near the birch tree we'd planted. Against all odds, it had survived. More than survived, it had grown. Not much, just a few inches, a handful of new branches, but it lived, a tiny spot of brown in an ocean of white, proof that life persisted. People came to see it regularly, as if it were a shrine. They'd touch the thin trunk gently, whisper things to it, leave small offerings, stones, scraps of cloth, written prayers for people they'd lost. It had become sacred not because of any divine significance, but because it represented the choice to hope when hope seemed impossible. I added my own offering that day, a small photo of Emma that I'd been carrying since the world fell apart. I tucked it into the frozen ground at the tree's base, along with a note I'd written for Emma, who never got to see this world, and for all the others lost along the way. We plant trees. We build communities. We survive. Because you couldn't. Because someone has to. Because hope, even small hope, even fragile hope, is the most defiant act we can manage. As I stood there in the cold, watching steam rise from the geothermal vents, listening to the distant sounds of people working together, I realized something important. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, not the life I'd imagined, not the life I'd wanted, but a life nonetheless, with purpose and meaning and connection, a life worth protecting, worth fighting for. The world hadn't healed, the ice hadn't receded, the sky was still gray, the temperature still deadly, the future still uncertain. But here in Eden, surrounded by people who'd chosen hope over despair, who planted trees knowing they might never see them grow tall, who broadcast into the static because someone might be listening here, life continued, and that would have to be enough. Epilogue. Transmission static crackles. A voice emerges, clear despite the interference. This is Sarah Chen, broadcasting from Eden Settlement, coordinates 784 North 102.3 West. If you're hearing this, you're still alive. That's no small thing. We're still here, 293 souls, give or take, clustered around geothermal vents in what used to be the Canadian Arctic. We have warmth, we have food, not much, but enough. We have shelter, we have community. We're not paradise. We have problems, conflicts, failures. We lose people. We make mistakes. We're human, which means we're flawed and fragile and foolish sometimes. But we endure. To anyone listening, if you can travel, if you have the resources and the strength, we're still accepting refugees. But I won't lie to you, the journey is dangerous. Many who try don't make it. Come prepared. Bring skills if you have them. Bring hope even if you don't. If you can't travel, if you're stuck where you are, then build your own Eden. Find heat, find community, find a reason to wake up tomorrow. Plant something even if it seems futile. Help someone even if it seems pointless. Choose life over mere survival. The world we knew is gone. It's not coming back, but we're still here, and that means something. It has to mean something to those I've lost along the way. I carry you with me, every broadcast, every person I help connect to another person. Every small act of defiance against the cold there for you. To those still fighting out there in the frozen world, stay alive. Stay human, don't let the cold win. To Emma, my daughter, my heart, I'm still here. I'm still fighting. I hope wherever you are, it's warm. This is Sarah Chen signing off. I'll broadcast again in 12 hours. Same frequencies, same message. We're still here. We're still hoping. And as long as we're breathing, there's a chance. Stay alive out there. Chin out. The transmission ends, static returns. But somewhere in that static, if you listen carefully, you might hear other voices, other survivors, other islands of warmth in the frozen world. The long dawn continues.